My trip to see my sister, I found my bedroom gone and my son's wife smiling in the guest room. She didn't know about the $28.00 M. When I opened the door to my own home, the first thing that hit me wasn't the scent of lavender or fresh flowers like I'd hoped. It was the thick, sickening smell of burning sage. Not the gentle kind you light to soothe a room, but the kind you wave around when you're trying to erase something. Or someone. And then I heard her voice, Clarice, clear as ever, echoing from the hallway. "This is my house now," she said, wineglass in hand, standing before a group of her brunch friends in pastel cardigans and over-tanned skin. "The old lady just lives in my husband's memory, and even that's fading." They all laughed. Laughed like she hadn't just dismissed 40 years of my life like some dried stain on a coffee table. I didn't speak. I simply stepped inside and closed the door behind me. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been gone. My sister Marjorie had a fall, and I'd taken the train out to Pittsburgh to help her while she healed. I folded her towels. I cooked her soup. I washed her hair. Every day I thought about coming home. I missed my garden. I missed my creaky rocking chair. I missed the smell of the cedar chest in my bedroom, but I never imagined I'd miss my own bedroom because someone else would be using it. I passed through the living room quietly. No one looked up. They were all laughing about mimosas and manifestation journals. When I reached the hallway, I stopped. My heart thudded hard in my chest, where my wedding photo used to hang, a photo I'd framed myself, with my husband's arm around my shoulders and that look in his eyes like he still couldn't believe I said yes. It was gone. In its place was a blown-up canvas print of Clarice and my son, smiling on a beach somewhere, holding hands like they invented love. The door to my bedroom, what used to be my bedroom, was wide open. Inside, the furniture was rearranged. My old quilt was gone. In its place were white and gold throw pillows, some faux fur blanket, and a garish new sign above the bed, his and hers, manifestation space. Clarice stood in the middle of the room, handing a mimosa to a friend. "We saged the room to get her scent out," she said, motioning toward the corner where my nightstand used to be. Her friends giggled. "She's like a ghost," one of them whispered, wandering around in slippers. "Maybe she left something in the will," another added. "Like her dentures." "I manifest her fading out," said a third, sipping her drink and curling her legs up on the bed I used to pray beside every night. I didn't say anything. I stepped back and made my way to the living room. My suitcase, the same one I'd packed for Marjorie's, was still sitting by the door. Nobody offered to take it. Nobody noticed. Later that night, Clarice told me she'd converted my bedroom for positive energy realignment and that it had become a healing space for her and my son. "You can sleep on the couch, Evelyn," she said, motioning to the stiff, floral sofa I hadn't sat on in years. "It's actually better for circulation at your age." She smiled like she was offering me a blessing. I turned to my son, but he was busy texting. He mumbled, "It's just temporary, Mom," without looking up. I stood there for a long moment, holding onto my suitcase handle with both hands. I didn't ask for the room back. I didn't argue. I just nodded. That night I lay on the couch, curled under an old Afghan that barely reached my feet. My lower back ached, and the lamp buzzed with a low electric hum. I heard them laughing from down the hall. My room, her room now, glowed under candlelight. The next morning, Clarice handed me a bottle of green juice and said, "Brunch starts at 11. Try not to be seen, okay? My friends are into minimalism." Minimalism. That's what I'd become, an object to minimize. I walked to the backyard and sat on the bench beside my dying hydrangeas. The hose was coiled, bone dry. No one had watered them while I was gone. I whispered, "I'm still here," but even the flowers seemed unsure. That evening, as I passed the dining room, I saw a note taped to the refrigerator. "No fridge items after 7 p.m., intermittent fasting hours," and underneath it in Sharpie, someone had scribbled, "Residents only." That was the night I knew they wanted me to disappear. Not just from the house, but from memory, from history, from the walls, the rooms, the life I'd built brick by brick. But what they didn't know was that ghosts don't fade, not if they remember who they are. And I remembered. I remembered every nail my husband hammered into the frame of this house. I remembered the day we planted the dogwood tree in the front yard. I remembered the night my son was born, right in that room Clarice had saged. And I remembered something else, too. something I hadn't told them. Yet. I've always believed that cruelty doesn't arrive with a scream. It creeps in softly, wearing a smile. It starts with small things, a door left half open, a picture quietly removed, a glance too long to be innocent, too short to be called caring. The morning after the brunch, I tried to connect to the Wi-Fi to check an email from my sister. The password had changed. I asked Clarice about it. She didn't even look up from her yoga mat. "Oh," she said casually. "We reset it while you were gone. It's for residents only now." She drew out the word residents, as if I were some stranger on a month-to-month lease. I nodded, said nothing, and walked away. Later that afternoon, I opened the refrigerator for some milk. A neon pink sticky note was slapped across the carton. "Not for seniors, plant-based only." I stared at it for a long time. I don't know what stung more, being called a senior like some expired item in the back of the fridge, or realizing someone had sat down and written that note by hand, peeled it carefully, and stuck it there for me to find. At lunch, Clarice sent a group message on the family thread. "Please stay out of the kitchen during brunch prep. It's a high-energy zone." Then another. Just below it, "Also, please do not rearrange anything on the counter. Feng shui matters." I never touched her counter. I never rearranged a thing. I hadn't even boiled water since I got back. But apparently my presence alone could disrupt her energy. That night I passed by the entryway table and saw a card propped up in a little silver stand. It read, "New home blessing, may this house be free of ghosts." I suppose I was the ghost. I stood in the hall, in front of the bedroom door that used to be mine. The smell of burned sage still clung to the frame. The walls had been repainted, a dull beige to match the aesthetic of her online lifestyle brand. They even changed the curtains. The ones I hand-stitched with roses and vines were gone, probably tossed just like everything else I loved. I didn't cry. I just watched the light flicker in the hallway and listened to the clink of wine glasses behind that door. Some nights I'd sit on the couch, a blanket pulled up to my chest, and scroll through old voicemails on my phone. My husband's voice was still there, that low, steady hum of a man who had never once made me feel like I was in the way. It's strange how a house can be full of voices, and none of them speak to you. But not all voices were cruel. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Everyone else was out for Clarice's full moon sound bath. Just me and little Natalie, my 9-year-old granddaughter, were home. She shuffled into the living room, dragging her stuffed bunny by one ear. She stood in front of me for a long time, quiet, like she was working up the courage to say something dangerous. Then she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small, wrinkled piece of fabric. "I saved this," she whispered. "They threw away your pillow, but I cut out the soft part before it got taken." She unfolded it carefully. A faded corner of my old pillowcase, the one with the stitched edge that frayed after years of being held close. "I thought you might still want it," she added, eyes darting toward the hallway like she feared being heard. My throat closed up. I reached out with both hands, took the piece gently, and pressed it to my chest. For a moment, I could feel the old cotton against my skin, could remember the nights I wept into it after my husband passed, the nights I folded it neatly before bed, the mornings it smelled of lavender sachets from the drawer. I looked at Natalie. She was biting her lip. "Do you miss your room?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I liked when it smelled like cinnamon," she said, "and you used to let me sit on your lap and read." "You still can," I whispered. She leaned in and curled up beside me, her head against my shoulder. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I hadn't disappeared. The next day, the cruelty resumed. Clarice dropped a basket of laundry on the couch while I was still sitting on it and said, "If you're going to be here all day, might as well fold something." She smiled. She always smiled when she delivered her little daggers. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was Natalie's tiny act of love. Maybe it was the feeling of that pillow fabric in my hand. Maybe it was the sound of my own heart saying, "You still matter." That night when I walked past the room again, I didn't look away. I opened the door slowly, stepped inside, and stood still. The air was thick with lavender candles and overpriced incense. I reached for the nightstand. Not mine anymore, but in the drawer was something they hadn't found. An old lamp, A gift from my husband years ago. Still plugged in, still humming faintly when I turned the knob. They thought it was just a lamp, but I remembered something about it they didn't, and suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. They wished to erase me, but they forgot who built the story they're trying to rewrite, and that story wasn't over yet. My husband never believed in shouting. He used to say, if they can't hear you whisper, they were never listening anyway. But the last thing he ever said to me, the one sentence I never forgot, came on a quiet afternoon just weeks before he passed. I was brushing his hair near the window, the sun making halos through the curtain lace, and he reached for my wrist, held it with surprising strength. If they ever try to erase you, he said, don't fight loud, fight smart. At the time, I thought he was being poetic, but I see now that he wasn't speaking in metaphors, he was preparing me. And so, I didn't yell when they changed the locks on the upstairs linen closet. I didn't protest when Clarice moved my favorite armchair into the garage to open up the feng shui. I didn't even flinch when my own wedding photo was replaced with a minimalist art print that said, New Era Energy. I waited, and I remembered. There was one item I'd insisted on keeping from our old bedroom when they remodeled. A lamp. Just an old brass lamp, with a little wobbly shade and a base that had once been scratched by our cat. Everyone else thought it was ugly, too old, too heavy, too grandma-core. Clarice tried to swap it out twice with something from her influencer gift sets, but I always brought it back. She stopped trying eventually. People always do when they think you've stopped mattering. That lamp had been a wedding gift, a special commission, actually. My husband had it made by a retired electrical engineer who owed him a favor. I never knew why he went through so much trouble for a bedside lamp. He just smiled and said, some things shine brighter when the world gets dark. It wasn't until he was gone, until the house grew sharp with other people's voices, that I remembered the tiny latch beneath the base. That night, I unplugged the lamp and turned it upside down on my lap. My fingers found the metal ridge beneath the felt. I peeled it back slowly, and there it was. A thin silver disc, no larger than a button, hidden flush inside the base. A small inscription around the edge. If you hear this, it means you need to. I took a deep breath and pressed it. The lamp didn't light up, but the room changed anyway. His voice came through clear as day, calm, steady, measured. This is Richard Allen Byrne, he began, recording this message as part of our private estate contract, witnessed and notarized on June 12, 2008. This message is intended for my wife, Eleanor, and the legal parties assigned under Clause 9C. My heart pounded. I held the lamp close, not daring to breathe. My assets, intellectual property, and residence are protected under trust. However, an additional clause has been included, one that may not be shared unless triggered by circumstances of direct disrespect or displacement of my wife from her rightful home. A pause. Then, the moment she is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, is the moment all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. In that moment, full ownership transfers to her name, with legal authority to remove any resident at will. I stared into the dark. He had known. Somehow he had known. And he had left me a weapon not made of steel or wrath, but of something far more terrifying to people like Clarice. Truth, bound in law. I repacked the lamp carefully, wrapped it in an old sweater, and placed it in the box marked Seasonal Decorations. No one would touch it there. Then I waited until Monday morning, when Clarice took her manifestation hike and my son left for work, and made a call. I didn't call the main family lawyer, I called her, Margot Doyle, my husband's oldest colleague. The woman who once joked, if the sharks ever come circling Ellie, I'll be the net. Margot answered on the first ring. Eleanor, she said, voice sharp and warm all at once. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I have something, I said. Something Richard left behind. Hidden. You'll need to hear it for yourself. I sent the lamp the next day, packed in bubble wrap, labeled simply, to MD, play at your desk, alone. She called me 2 days later. I always knew your husband was a fox, she said. But this is art. Will it hold up, I asked. In court, like granite, she replied. The only thing left is to trigger the clause officially. Do you have proof of mistreatment? I thought of the brunch, the comments, the sticky notes, the locked cabinet. "I have more than proof," I said. "I have a child's whisper and a pillowcase scrap. I have a wedding photo in a drawer and a ghost blessing taped to the door. And I have silence." So much silence. Margot didn't need convincing. She'd seen worse from greedier people. We arranged the rest in code. Package delivery meant court filing. Sunlight refund meant a formal hearing date. Lavender tea meant subpoena. It felt almost fun. Like being in one of those detective shows Clarice always rolled her eyes at. But this wasn't a show. This was my life, and I wasn't going to sit on the couch another week while someone else burned sage in the place I once called sanctuary. I dusted off my good shoes, I ironed my blouse. I looked into the mirror and saw a woman with purpose. My voice wasn't loud, but now it had speakers, and they had no idea what was coming. It began decades ago, over cheap wine and cheaper office chairs. My husband and I started our first business with a stack of scribbled napkin ideas, a few boxes of secondhand parts, and a stubborn refusal to quit. He handled the patents and the pitching. I handled the people, the contracts, the licensing deals, the long meetings that stretched into dinner. We didn't have titles, but we were equal in every way that mattered. When the business finally took off, and then took off again, Richard said to me over breakfast one day, "We'll put your shares into a trust. Quietly, just in case." "In case of what?" I had asked. "In case the world ever gets noisy," he replied, without looking up from his eggs. At the time, I thought it was a romantic gesture. Turns out, it was a weapon he'd forged long before the war began. The trust had sat undisturbed for nearly 20 years. We never touched it, never bragged about it. Even when Forbes put his face in the corner of a page, or when we got calls from people wanting to leverage opportunities, we smiled politely and said, "No, thank you." We kept our lives small. What Clarice never understood was that quiet wealth doesn't look like yachts or handbags. It looks like a woman baking muffins in an old house, with $28 million, 0 cents, parked neatly in a trust deed no one's bothered to look at in decades. Until now. Margot and I sat in the conference room, side by side. Across from us were Clarice and my son Aaron, both acting as though this was just some petty dispute over square footage. They didn't know what was coming. Not yet. "Let's begin," Margot said, sliding a leather-bound folder across the table. "This is the formal reading of the Byrne Domestic Living Trust, last revised in 2011. Clarice rolled her eyes. Margot continued, calm and steady. Clause 14b, also known as the Conduct Clause, states the following. Any individual, whether familial or legal heir, who knowingly subjects Eleanor Byrne to verbal disparagement, emotional displacement, or involuntary eviction from the shared household, shall immediately and irrevocably forfeit all rights to inheritance and occupancy." I glanced at Aaron. He was pale. Clarice scoffed. "That's ridiculous. You can't enforce a mood." "We're not enforcing a mood," Margot said coolly. "We're enforcing documented violations." She reached into her briefcase and produced a flash drive, a stack of printed stills, and a lamp. Yes, the same lamp that had lived on my bedside table for years. Now it sat at the center of the table, like a witness called to testify. Margot plugged the flash drive into the monitor. First, a video clip. Clarice at her brunch, champagne in hand, sitting cross-legged on my bed. "This is my house now. The old lady just lives in my husband's memory, and even that's fading." Laughter erupted in the background. Another voice. "Maybe she left something in the will, like her dentures." And then Clarice again. "I manifest her fading out." The room went silent. My heart didn't race. It slowed, steady as granite. I'd heard it live. But hearing it now, with the weight of law behind it, gave it power. Next came the photos. One showed the bedroom door with a new sign, his and hers, manifestation space. Another showed the brunch guests lounging on my old quilt. Another showed me curled on the living room sofa under a throw blanket, next to a note that read, "For circulation." Finally, Margot picked up the lamp. This lamp contains a digital audio recording made by Richard Byrne, dated and time-stamped June 12, 2008, in the presence of notary Marion S. Klein. It was sealed and stored in a secure compartment inside the base. The audio has been authenticated by forensic analysts and notarized as legal testament under Pennsylvania statute. She pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room. The moment she is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, is the moment all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. In that moment, full ownership transfers to her name, with legal authority to remove any resident at will. Aaron shifted in his seat. Clarice narrowed her eyes. You can't be serious. This is insane. Margot smiled, the kind of smile lawyers save for checkmate. It's not insane. It's legal. The trust is valid. The clause is active. The evidence is overwhelming. She turned to me. Eleanor, per clause 14b, would you like to invoke your rights under the trust? I looked at Clarice, not with anger, but with something deeper, pity, maybe, or perhaps quiet satisfaction. Yes, I said, effective immediately. Margot handed me a pen. With one signature, it was done. Clarice was cut off from the trust entirely. No financial support, no claim to the house, no more lavender brunches on my linens. Aaron would retain a conditional share, but only if he vacated the home within 3 days and issued a written apology for his complicity. They both stormed out, red-faced and sputtering. Clarice tried to slam the door on the way out. It bounced back softly. I'd already replaced the hinges. Margot turned to me as I gathered my things. What will you do with the house? She asked. I smiled. I'll sell it, even after all this? Especially after all this. Because the truth was, this house had stopped feeling like home the moment I was forced to whisper in hallways. A home isn't walls and photos. It's safety. It's softness. It's being allowed to take up space. Now that I had it back, I no longer needed it. But the freedom? That I'd keep. They made me sit on the far end of the table, near the water cooler, away from the windows, as if I might catch a chill from the truth. Clarice walked in first, wearing sunglasses indoors and carrying a designer bag I suspected she didn't buy with her own money. My son followed, late as always, his phone in one hand, chewing gum, like he had better things to do than attend his own father's will reading. Let's get this over with, he muttered, slumping into the chair across from me. She probably left you some old tea sets and that damn lamp, Clarice snorted. Don't expect a dime for her. She'll be dead by Christmas anyway. I folded my hands in my lap, not trembling, not reacting, just waiting. Margot, my lawyer, gave me a slight nod. She opened a thin leather folder and adjusted the volume on the small speaker device in front of her. No printed copies today, she said. Per Mr. Burns' final instruction, the primary clauses of the will are to be delivered in his voice only. Aaron raised an eyebrow. What the hell does that mean? Margot pressed the button, and Richard spoke. Not the frail version of him near the end, but the Richard I remembered, clear, commanding. If my son or his wife ever disrespect the woman who built this house, if they ever reduce her to anything less than she is, deduct everything. I built my name, my company, and my fortune with Eleanor, and if you've forgotten that, then you've forgotten who raised you. Aaron leaned forward, stunned. Richard's voice continued, even calmer now. To Clarice, your brunches may be cute, but cruelty is not. This house was not built by mood boards and sage sticks. It was built by my wife, who scrubbed parts by hand while raising a son I now struggle to recognize. Clarice opened her mouth, then shut it. For once. To Eleanor. I name you sole executor and sole beneficiary. This trust, assets, property, and shares reverts entirely to your name the moment my voice ends. Let them call that manifestation. And then silence. Not just in the room, inside them. Aaron sat frozen. Clarice's face twisted, searching for a loophole, an angle, some language she could weaponize, but there wasn't one. Because Richard had planned it better than they ever could. Margot slid over the new deed paperwork, already notarized. Effective immediately, Mrs. Eleanor Byrne is the sole owner of the following assets. The primary residence located at 814 Redwood Lane. Full rights to the Byrne Trust totaling $20 million, 0 cents. Majority shareholder status in Byrne Solutions, Inc., and exclusive ownership of the intellectual property portfolio. Clarice stood up so quickly her chair tipped backward. This is illegal, she snapped. You can't just cut family out like that. Margot didn't flinch. Yes, we can, and he did. Every document was filed, time-stamped, witnessed, and backed by voice authentication. "This is airtight." Clarice turned to Aaron, eyes wild. "Do something." He looked at me instead, for the first time in years. "You knew about this?" he said, voice low. "I knew about the lamp," I said softly. "But the rest? No, I didn't ask for it. He just remembered." Clarice grabbed her purse and stormed out. Aaron stayed seated, eyes hollow. "You could have told me." "I could have," I agreed. "But would it have changed how you treated me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, slow. "Do you want me out by tomorrow?" "You have 3 days," I said. "That's more than you gave me," he nodded. No fight left in him. When he left the room, the air shifted. Margot leaned back and exhaled. "That's the first time I've seen a clause like that executed cleanly." I smiled faintly. "It wasn't written out of anger." "No, it was written out of memory." Richard remembered who I was before they tried to erase me. She began organizing the papers. "What will you do next?" "I'm going to pack my lamp and my little chair, and then," I said, standing, "I think I'll go home and start looking for a buyer." Margot paused. "You're selling the house?" "Of course. You just got it back." "Exactly," I said, and that's all I needed, to know it was mine before I chose to leave it. At the door I paused and looked back once more at the conference table, at the empty chairs, at the silence they left behind. They thought they could manifest my absence, but all they summoned was my return, and now I was the one holding the pen. The court order was clear: no debate, no appeals. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." I didn't need to read it again. I watched Aaron's face as the bailiff handed him the document. He didn't blink, just stared at the official seal like it might melt if he looked long enough. Clarice, on the other hand, exploded. "This is abuse," she screamed. "She's abusing the system. She's abusing us." I stood silently, my coat buttoned, my hands folded, the same way I had stood quietly in the hallway 3 weeks ago while she sipped wine on my bed and called it the rebirth suite. Now the bed was mine again. And the rebirth? Mine too. Aaron stepped forward, slower this time, his voice softer than I had heard in years. "Please, Mom. It was just a joke. All of it. We didn't mean it. You know, Clarice, she talks big, but..." I turned my gaze to him. I let the silence sting for just a moment longer. "You joked," I said, each word precise. The will listened. He dropped his head. The sound of paper fluttering to the ground filled the room. Clarice was next, her mascara already smeared, her hands flailing like a drowning woman clinging to furniture. "You're heartless," she sobbed. "We welcomed you back. We let you stay. You let me sleep on a sofa in the house I built," I said. "You covered my face in sage and called it a blessing. I gave you a home. You gave me hell." She gasped, but no more words came out, only a shrill sound that even the chandelier winced at. I turned and walked down the hallway of my own house. The walls were still painted beige, her favorite shade of bland. But the light felt different now. Warmer, clearer. Room by room, I reclaimed what had been taken. In the dining room, I reached for the sideboard drawer. Inside were my embroidered napkins, hidden beneath Clarice's gold-trimmed ones, as if my stitches weren't good enough for wine glasses. In the study, I opened a drawer labeled with a sticker that read, "Manifestation Books Only." I smiled, peeled the sticker off, and placed it in my pocket, and then I entered the master bedroom. My bedroom. The rebirth suite, as she'd called it. I stared at the vision board she'd hung above the headboard, filled with magazine cutouts and phrases like "This year is mine" and "Claim it, girl." I ripped it down in one motion. As I folded the torn poster board, something caught my eye. Dozens of post-it notes still stuck to furniture, vases, drawers, each scrawled with a thick marker. "This one's mine. This one too. Mine. Manifested by C." I went room by room, pulling off every last one. In the kitchen, "This Dutch oven is mine." In the hallway, "C's lamp. Don't touch." On the mirror, her reflections fading, mine just beginning. I didn't cry, not once. I placed them all in a brown envelope, sealed it shut, and set it on the couch. Yes, the one I used to sleep on. I labeled it with a single word: returned. Later that evening, Aaron knocked gently on my door. He didn't come in until I told him to. He stood there, wringing his hands like a schoolboy caught lying. "We'll go," he said. "I just wanted you to know, it didn't start this way. We didn't plan to be cruel." I nodded. "But it ended that way." He looked down. "I miss Dad." "I do too," I whispered. "But missing someone doesn't give you permission to become someone they'd hate." He nodded again, slower. "Do you need help packing?" I asked. "No, we'll be out by Friday." He left quietly. Clarice didn't say goodbye, and I didn't expect her to. That night I made tea with my favorite porcelain cup, the one I found stuffed in the back of the pantry with a note on it that said, "Too old ladyish." I sat by the window. The lights from the garden flickered softly, just as Richard had designed them decades ago. Motion-activated, solar-powered, efficient. "Always leave something behind that works without you," he used to say. I think he did. And now, so will I. I sold the house the next morning. No second thoughts, no tours, no waiting. I signed the papers with a calm hand while Clarice was still shrieking into her phone on the front lawn. And Aaron stood beside her, empty-eyed, watching everything slip through his fingers. I didn't look back. Within 2 weeks, I was living in a quiet little apartment near Central Park in New York. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a balcony with just enough room for a rocking chair and a potted plant. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Mine, not borrowed, not tolerated, not walked around like I was invisible. Every morning, I took walks through the park. I watched dogs chase pigeons. I listened to the sounds of violins from buskers beneath the trees. I started reading again, real books, the kind with folded corners and no deadlines. No one interrupted. No one told me what I couldn't eat or where I could sit. It was the kind of silence that heals, not the kind they gave me before. I thought about how easily they had tried to erase me, not with cruelty alone, but with performance, with brunches and hashtags and phrases like, "good for circulation at her age." It wasn't just Clarice. It was the world she represented, one that smiles while it quietly rewrites you out. So I did something with the silence. I used it to start something new. I took $2 million, 0 cents, from the inheritance and set up a fund called Women Who Were Erased. It's small, for now, but it's real. The fund offers legal counsel, emergency housing, and emotional support for elderly women discarded by their families. Women who are told they're too much or in the way. Women who are mocked behind their backs while standing right there. Women like me, but not anymore. My name isn't on the foundation plaque. I don't want it to be. Let the world think it came from nowhere, just like they once thought I did. But there's one thing I kept. Taped to my fridge door, above the grocery list, is a note from my youngest grandchild, written in crooked block letters with a pink glitter pen. "Grandma, 1 mean lady, 0. I see it every morning when I open the fridge, and every morning it reminds me that some victories are quiet, but they echo forever. There's a wooden plaque on the door of my new apartment now. I carved it myself with an old penknife my husband gave me one Christmas when money was tight and love was all we had. The words on it are simple, etched deep. This house was once imagined out of existence. Now it thinks for itself. It's not just a door, it's a beginning. Inside, everything is small but meaningful. A chair that fits me just right, a soft rug beneath my bare feet, the humming sound of the city outside, filtered through warm, clean windows. And the fridge. Right there on the fridge is the note from my granddaughter, written on pink paper, her letters uneven, glitter smudged in the corner. Grandma, 1, mean lady, 0. I didn't tape it there, she did. Quietly when her mother wasn't looking, during one of her last supervised visits. She hugged me tight that day, whispered, "I'm proud of you," and tucked a tiny origami heart into my coat pocket. That night I sat in my armchair with the city lights flickering outside, like stars I could almost touch, and I let myself cry, not from pain, but from release. For all the times I had swallowed words, turned the other cheek, made myself smaller so others could feel big, not anymore. I drink coffee in silence now, not silence out of exile, but silence I choose. I stretch when I wake up, I light candles when it rains, I think out loud. I think about the versions of me they invented, ghost, burden, fading memory, and then I remember. None of those were ever mine. I was never fading. I was watching. I was waiting for the right moment, and when it came, I didn't raise my voice. I raised the will. I raised the truth. I raised myself. Now, when the wind rattles the windows and the world outside forgets to be kind, I stand at my doorway, run my fingers across the carved wood, and say to no one and everyone, they thought I was fading, but I was just waiting for the right moment to think out loud. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone who deserves better, you're not alone. At Grandma True Stories, we tell the truth behind closed doors, the kind of truth that whispers, endures, and sometimes roars when the time is right. So if you believe in second chances, in quiet strength, and in justice that doesn't always knock, it sometimes carves its way in, then this is your home too. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories and hit the bell so you never miss a story that matters. Because every grandma has a story, and some of them will leave you breathless.